we're good to go. All right. Thank you, people, for your patience. We had some interesting startup problems there, but we are finally live. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody. It is probably evening for you guys in America and early morning for us people in Australia, and sometime between for you guys in Europe. But welcome. We have our very, very special guest today, the man, the myth, the legend, Jake Kaminski. Welcome. Thank you. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Good to be here, finally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been an amazing. It's been such an interesting year for us archers. Especially so many of us are still at home watching and trying to get into archery and trying to continue archery. But we are finally here with a nice opportunity to talk through perhaps the biggest passion that we all miss, and hopefully we can all get through this, get something out of this, and get through this, and become better people, better archers after this. So I guess we're straight into it. There are probably a few
Sure.
things, a lot of things, which we want to talk about. But just for those who don't know Jake, like the three of you don't know Jake, Jake, of course, is a very renowned American archer. He's been a cornerstone of the American team for the last like 10 years or so until you retired from the competitive scene. And of course, nowadays he's very much into coaching services, and of course, the most recent thing, your book launch, and we'll talk about that very shortly.
Yeah,
So, I
definitely.
guess we always start like this. I mean, and I've had the chance to work with you previously, but it's nice time to share again with our new viewers. What's your origin story, Jake? How did you get into archery?
My origin story. So I grew up in a small town in outside of Western New York, outside of Buffalo, New York. Not to be confused with New York City. Totally different New York. And basically, my dad was a chief of the volunteer fire company, and they have a gun raffle every two times a year, basically. And my dad won the bow during the gun raffle. It was like the fall gun raffle or something. I was 5 years old, and it was an adult, compound hunting bow. So I couldn't use it. So we drove down to, I think it was Kmart or some department store that was around, and I got a Bear compound bow, like one of those tiny little green fiberglass compounds, and started shooting in my backyard. I started shooting at hay bales on my 6th birthday. That's when I got my bow, my first arrow. I vividly remember my very first arrow of 20 yards, which is twice the distance you would ever start any 6-year-old to be shooting. And when I let go, that thing went dead center, inside out in the X, the very first shot. So, my brother grabbed the bow out of my hand in disbelief and missed tons of arrows. And then, of course, I missed every single arrow after that for forever. And then I found a local junior development program where they got the bow from for the gun raffle, and basically just started shooting there and never really stopped. I shot compound for about 6 years competitively. I went to junior nationals once with the compound, and then I switched to recurve to actually try out for the Empire State Games, which is like a mini Olympics, basically a multi-sports event. You go and stay at a college dorm, and I did that at 12 years old, basically, and fell in love with it. I was dealing with massive target panic with the compound, so much so that with the hinge and the back tension, the further I knew it was going to go off. So the further I rolled my hand, the lower my bow arm dropped. I just couldn't hold the pin in the middle. It was, horrible. I couldn't manage it. So recurve, with a clicker and stuff, kind of freed me from that, and never really stopped. And then got recruited by Coach Lee to go out to the Olympic Training Center when I turned 18. Um, Shot with him full time under his tutelage for 6 years, and then continued for another 4 or 5 years after that, and then retired. So yeah,
So, my first question, like a lot of us go to archery as a casual hobby thing. We always wanted to do it, and I guess and a few of us aspire to become like high performance elite athletes and win gold medals and sort of
sure.
stuff. What's the pathway? I mean, this is something which like so few of us ever experience, and we don't really know about the mystique of like Olympic archery or the Olympic Games, and you've been through this a couple of times yourself. So, like, how did you go
Yeah.
from like shooting in your backyard to getting selected for like high performance training and getting to the Olympics?
Well, basically, I mean, even when I shot compound, I didn't even know that archery was in the Olympics. I mean, I knew that there was the Olympics because just about everybody at least gets to see part of it on TV because your parents want to watch it, and it's exciting stuff. So I knew it was out there. I had no aspirations at that point to go to the Olympics ever, and I shot so many arrows shooting compound, just flinging arrows in the backyard because I grew up on like 15 acres of land in the back of the woods, and really just had freedom and just shot all the time. I just remember shooting all the time, between that and jumping on a trampoline that we had in the backyard. So it's like, lived on those two things basically. And, once I discovered the Olympics with a recurve and discovered the Empire State Games and all that stuff, I just picked it up and I said, you know what, I think I'm going to try. Like this could be fun. I'm going to go for it. And, in the States here, we have the JOAD program, Junior Olympic Archery Development. And it was a pretty well-structured program to where you had like scores you had to shoot at different distances, and then you got awards. So we used to get patches that you could like sew on your quiver. And then you get a big certificate that you could put on the wall or something like that. So they had levels all the way up to shooting, like for indoors, a 290 on a 40 centimeter face was the highest level. And I shot that and achieved that when I was probably 15, 16. So even then I kind of peaked out of what I was doing. And then I was going for making the junior, world team and things like that, and started trying out for those things. And, I went from basically winning states every time I went to it to regionals, and then started dominating nationally. And then, got picked up and recruited basically because I was doing well as a junior. I hadn't shot any senior tournaments at that time because there was no crossover. There was no, now in the States as a junior, your ranking round counts for your junior ranking, but then when you go to shoot the elimination rounds, it ranks you in the adults. So then you're shooting against the adults, even at 15, 16 years old. Whereas before you wouldn't shoot against the adults until you aged out of 18, basically. So I had no exposure to that, unfortunately. I think it's a good thing now that they do it. I think it really helps the development of the individual. At least it gives them an idea or like where the threshold is to being a good archer, what scores is needed, things like that. But yeah, I mean, just kind of like this inner drive of I want to go to the games and, shooting in my backyard by myself, basically, for the most part. I did have like a kind of a coach, more of a mentor than anything, that helped their own son shoot well, as far as the encouraging them to shoot more arrows and stuff like that. So I was trying to work up to shooting 2 feet a day, but I never could make it. I couldn't shoot that amount of arrows. And I was only shooting maybe 38, 40 pounds or something like that at the time, and just never really needed to shoot much more than that. And then I would probably shoot maybe 100 arrows a day at the very most. And that's what got me to the Olympic Training Center, and working with Coach Lee at that point. So it's not, no magic sauce or anything like that. It just kind of evolved as time went on.
So what's it like being in the high level programs? So you mentioned working with Coach Lee and working national team. So again, this is something which a lot of us haven't experienced and probably won't experience. Sure. Sorry guys, but this is a reality check here. You got to be pretty good and pretty lucky in some cases to have opportunities. But for those of us who are still ambitious and young and have time, what's it like to be in that kind of level of training, which most of us have never seen before?
At that level of training, it is all-consuming. I mean, there is no other life other than archery, or training, or whatever it is. It could be shooting arrows. It could be running, getting fit. It could be lifting weights to be strong. It could be going to sports medicine for recovery, talking to the nutritionist for dietary guidelines, trying to eat as much food as possible to refuel because you're working your butt off. And, on top of all of that, you're then also trying to develop your mental game as well. So you're working on visualization, you're working with a sports psychologist, or working with like Lanny and Troy Bassam came out to the training center and we did, stuff with their mental management systems. lots and lots of different stuff basically that you're exposed to. So it is fully involved. There is nothing else. There is no time available for anything else at all. And especially when I was in the beginning stages in the development, you're not making money. There's no stipend. There was nothing to be had. So, you're not winning money at tournaments. You're not securing sponsors. The program itself gets an allotment of equipment. So like they get one bow per archer per year, basically. So you can get a new bow, or you can get a new set of limbs if you need them, but you really got to display that you need them or that you have earned them, really. You get a dozen arrows, you get a dozen X10s, you break one, you Robin Hood one. Well, now you got 11. That's it. You got to make those arrows last. And really only the people who shot really well got more equipment than that. Until you reach a certain level that you can get your own personal sponsorships through arrow companies, bow companies, or whatever it is. So, pretty limiting as far as that goes. Because in the beginning, I had to make choices of, do I buy a new pair of shoes because I really need them? Like my toes are almost hanging out the end of my sneakers. Or do I go to the movies because everyone else is going to the movies and enjoying themselves and trying to relax and have a bit of a moment of, just normalcy? And it's like, I got to choose shoes because I need shoes at this point, So I had to make those choices and decisions. It's not very glorious by any means. Especially for me, it was really difficult dealing with injuries, overuse injuries and stuff. Because like I said, I went from pretty much never working out a day in my life, shooting 100 arrows a day, if that, maybe 5 days a week, to shooting 300 to 500 arrows a day, 6 days a week, lifting weights 3 days a week for 2 hours, running every day, really overloading my system, going from 0 to a million way too quick, but that kind of separates those that want it and those that can't achieve it if you're going to really stick to it, So I could see why we did it, but it was challenging, But as far as like what it's like, you have a lot at your disposal. You have a lot afforded to you, especially if you pay attention and you are willing to be there when special people come in, like when somebody comes in to show you a mental like metric measuring device, or somebody that can enhance your stability and your overall motor control, or somebody that's bringing in some sort of laser therapy machine or something like that. And, there's a lot of things and a lot of exposures that were there because at the Olympic Training Center, every sport was there as well, basically. So, you had a lot of people there, including dietitians, including sports performance people, you name it. And if you wanted it, you could find it and you could get it. So there was a lot afforded to you. But in the beginning, like I said, I was on the range from 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. every single day with only an hour break for lunch. So, there's no time for anything other than shooting at that point. Yeah.
I have a question. How structured is it? Because again, I've never seen this sort of training program or center before. So how structured is your routine? Is it something which you have a lot of like agency in, or is it something which is prescribed for you that you have to follow every week?
Pretty much prescribed for you. Not really now. Well, it depends on the level of archer you are, to be honest. And the program has evolved slightly throughout time. But when I was there, it was very strict. You had to be at the track in the morning at 6 a.m., which was before the food line opened, so you couldn't eat food. And we did at least a half hour to 45 minutes of work on the track, whether it be running or sprints or beep test or whatever it may be, in the morning. And then we've got about 35 minutes or so to eat and shower if you want to, and then get down to the range. And we had to be down on the range. Time changed throughout the cycles, but basically, like, we'll say 8 a.m. 8 a.m. you started. If you were there at 8:01, Coach Lee made you run 2.5 laps around a 2-mile field. You had to run. There was no option. And then you got to your training. But so basically, you get there at 8. you can set your bow up, and then basically by 8:10, 8:15, we did everyone, the entire team from advanced to beginners. We grabbed light bows off the wall, like 10, 12-pound bows, stretch bands, and the form straps. And we did at least 5 to 15 minutes per device standing in front of a mirror at minimum before anyone was allowed to shoot. Now, the beginners, I wasn't, we started working on form, because I was there just before Junior World Team Trials. So I shot that before they really started, well, before they totally broke down my form. And since then, I hadn't shot for several months. Like I wasn't allowed to touch my own bow for several months, even letting it go or anything like that. I couldn't let a stretch band go for a few weeks. I wasn't allowed to release. So, and then, you work through the day, and it was either 11:30 or noon. You broke for lunch, back down at the field by 1:30 or 1, depending on the training cycle. And again, same thing. If you're 1 minute late, you're running again. And then ending at pretty much 5:30 to head to the weight room Monday, Wednesday, Friday for an hour and a half of weights. And then you eat your food and you're done, basically. So it can be super structured. We'll say like we shot 6 days a week. Thursday was a half day. Saturday was a half day. Saturdays, we always did mock competitions. So we either shot double elimination, head-to-head match play, or gold game, something along those lines. Thursday was kind of more self-paced. You got to do what you want. It was supposed to be your recovery day. The afternoon, you were supposed to do something else, something like either cross-training or go to sports med. And then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, you basically shot, all the time. Just either it be blank bale, shooting at dots, shooting at distance, practicing FITAs when we still shot FITAs. Lots of different stuff. It could be gold game interjected in throughout the week, depending on what the cycle was and what was coming up. Was it already competition season, or were we building up? If we were building up, we were shooting more arrows at blank bale so we can get more volume and get stronger. If it was competition season, we'd be shooting more scoring, more gold game, things like that.
And just the benefit of those who haven't heard of it, what's the gold game?
So in a nutshell, gold game is you start with your arrow knocked on your string. You can put your finger, you could be in set position, so your fingers on the string and your hand in the grip. And essentially, you have, in the beginning, when it was real gold game, you had 8 seconds. A beep would sound, and the timer would start, and you'd have 8 seconds to pull up on the target and get the shot off. If you didn't shoot within 8 seconds, it was -2 points. If you got your arrow off, great. And then you're looking at the target, and aim on gold game, you get 1 point for hitting in the gold, 0 points for an 8, and -1 from 7 and out. And then you would basically, depending on the day or depending on the skill level of the person at that time, they will say, okay, you're going for 30 points, you're going for 45 points, you're going for 50 points. On average, the top level shooters would be doing 45 points basically. We would shoot that roughly with 90% proficiency. So we'd end up shooting about 50 arrows ish, 50 to 55 arrows to score 45 points. So, yeah.
It's amazing. Just for those in chat right now, I know me included, but I know quite a few people in chat are probably kind of freaking out all these like strange words like dietitian and weight training, sports science. Yeah. So I was curious for those in chat, like how does this compare to your training schedule? Like looking at many of us are just like weekend hobbyists or do what we can on spare time. I know a lot of us are dedicated, and some of us are actually shooting at our competitive level. But compared to what Jake said, what's your story like? Posting in either the chat or in the comments later on. How's this compared to your training schedule? I guess that it matches my wish list of what I should be doing, but definitely not what I'm currently doing.
It's tough. It's tough. It's hard work, and
wow.
It's actually like it hurts. It's not fun. It's just like any other sport you're training for. Sports medicine is there because if in their minds, if you're not sore, you're not training hard enough because if you're not sore, you're either not shooting enough arrows, you're not lifting enough, you're not pushing yourself enough. That was kind of with the whole thing. So it was intense. Yeah.
And this is kind of what I imagine like high level athletic sports to be like. And a lot of people have this perception that archery isn't athletic, which is obviously not true given how much training you do. And that's sort of thing which I can't experience myself because I don't work in this frequently enough. I mean, the best I do, like I said, is maybe once or twice a week. I mean, back when I shot the World Indoor Series like once, that was like, oh yeah, I'll shoot like an hour a day or something, and that was like the most I ever got out of it. So
Sure.
like
Well, I
that.
mean, just think about it as a job.
Mm,
I know you're a teacher, but if you've done anything else, or whatever, you're literally shooting for the same amount of time that you're working to put food on your table.
mm.
That is it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably the biggest gulf between like a casual and a recreational archer and
Yes,
someone who's an
absolutely.
elite athlete. It is a job, especially if you working, you're basically living on site, you're working on site. This is what you do.
Yep.
Every day, like 7 days a week, basically, and
Yeah.
like I said before to us in chat, like it's such a level which is I wouldn't say it's unreachable, but it's not within current reach for most people, and most people don't aspire to be that dedicated to archery. But that dedication certainly brings like unique advantages compared to what we do normally. So I guess my next question would be like like you've competed against many international archers and from different countries. How do you think your preparation compares to other athletes from other countries?
So as far as like top level type of countries, I would
Yeah.
say on par. Pretty much everybody shoots about the same, give or take. Korea more. They do a lot more leading up to the level that they get to. And we can talk a little bit more about that if you want to, because I have some insight on that.
Hmm.
Also, like French archers would shoot about 1,800 arrows a week. I knew that, hearing from their coach telling us
Hmm.
about how many arrows they shoot. Same thing for Italy. Like those guys, they all shoot a lot of arrows. Some of the other countries that are starting to get better, they are starting to shoot more, because they're starting to get more funding, to basically allow archers to shoot some more. The main difference between the U.S. and a lot of other countries is we have zero state funding for the
Hmm.
sports. No funding. It is all private party funding. So everybody that donates money to the United States Olympic Committee, the
Hmm.
USOC, they then take money and decide which teams to give it to based on their performances. And then those teams use those funds for stuff. So whether that be stipends or whatnot, whereas like Italy or Korea or some of those other places, they actually give their archers salaries, for the year to basically cover living expenses, and then
Hmm.
they pay for all their travel on top of that. So, and because it's all state funded, they tax people for it, or like in the UK, it's lottery funded,
Hmm.
things like that. So it's different. But I would say top level archers are all shooting about the same. You got to be shooting at, in my opinion, at least 180 arrows a day to maintain. If you want to get better, you got to shoot more than that. If you want to maintain a high level of performance, it's around that 180 mark, to maintain performance, and that's 6 days a week. Yeah.
Wow.
So I know
Yeah.
people here in the states that are lawyers and, or even like baristas at Starbucks or whatever their normal day job is, or their night job, depending on when they're shooting. And then they shoot when they can. They have a target in their garage. They shoot blank bale, or in their house, or are lucky enough to live on enough land to shoot distance in their backyard.
Hmm. I've
Yeah,
got a few questions in chat right now. By the way, chat, just feel free
sure.
to ask questions. I know, like, we're having a conversation, having a bit of interview here, but this is a pretty casual stream. So, anyone with a question, just jump in chat, ask a question, tag me or Jake, and we can hopefully address it. So, we've got a question from With Each Breath in chat here. Nice name. So, when you say a lot of arrows, do you include, like, every arrow shoot? Like, like, including blank bell shooting, or is it just scored rounds? Like, how do you count arrows?
Everything. So we would have, depending on the cycle, we would either have a score we must shoot, meaning like you have to go shoot a 1440 feet around,
Hmm.
or you have to go shoot 4 36 arrow rounds at 70 meters in the morning, and then you have two more to shoot in the afternoon, or whatever it is. So they may break it down by rounds that you shoot, but generally speaking, you carry a people counter, one of those things that you see people counting people as they're walking through the doors. And you literally every single arrow from blank bail to scoring, you just click it every time you shoot an arrow, basically. And my system evolved to I would just take my point and I'd poke a tiny little hole in the target face down in the lower corner for every end that I shot, because I always shot 12 arrow ends or whatever it may be. Yeah, that's exactly what we would use.
But that's one of you. I'm showing my
Yep.
camera here. That's the clickers. I obviously haven't shot 8,000 arrows recently. That's from my entire career, but that's how it works. So we carry one of these around. Definitely useful. These are basically just counters. But we call them arrow counters, but they're really just like normal people counters. You can buy them anywhere you want. But this particularly branded Excess Wings. It's given for free. But yeah, you carry this around, and every end or so you just click them with arrows. Hardest thing is remembering, because sometimes you just shoot and you go, oh yeah, I haven't touched it for a while. So you go, oh yeah, it was 50 arrows.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
obviously,
exactly.
when you're more serious, then you'll have to track this a lot more carefully. But definitely
Yeah,
something
high
to
level.
keep interested
A lot
in.
of high level shooters, especially juniors, will have those on their quiver because they're counting every single arrow they shoot. You know. Yep. Yep.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I definitely, I think arrow volume is something which is kind of understated sometimes. I definitely like some of my first exposures to people shooting more seriously. Like we had people come from interstate. They visit family and they brought the bows along. Said, hey, is your club open? Because we're gonna practice our range, get an arrow volume. And most of us are casuals, like arrow volume. Like don't just like take a break. And no, we need to shoot.
Yeah.
So like they're the arrow counters and they're setting up and we're like, whoa, these guys are like they're not even elite athletes, they're just athletes. And you can see that the mentality is so much different. It's like, people who I guess for many of us can relate to this, like people who run, like they just have to run. Like you might take a
Yeah.
break, go on a holiday, but you just have to run. So you maintain the same discipline, the same routine as much as possible.
Yep. Yeah. My
Mm,
my rule of thumb is if you took 2 days off, you started to lose. You could not take more than one day off, because if you took 2 days off in a row, you lost it. Yeah, you got
absolutely.
to start gaining back. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you do you think that's especially for recurve?
Yes, absolutely. Recurve, barebow, anything without a wheel, anything without a scope and a release aid.
And like
Absolutely.
we don't say this to slander compound. We all love compounds, by the way.
No.
But I guess
But that's not to diminish like a top level compound shooter. That same thing goes for them. If they take 2 days off, they're off that enough. They're off 1 point, and 1 point's enough to put them out of contention. You know, but to get to a level of proficiency, it's a lot easier when stuff does it for you, basically.
yeah,
But
we generally
you
say
know,
that compound has a lower skill floor, so it's easier to be proficient with
sure,
compound. And you
yeah,
probably again, like, the higher you are, the more you lose when it comes to like not training. But with compound, you tend to
absolutely,
maintain at least you can hit the gold after like a few months off, and you don't feel bad about it if you miss a couple. But at the very
yeah,
highest levels, it gets very very tight. Like 1 point off is gonna cost you 20 places in the standings, that sort of
yeah,
thing. And with recurve,
oh yeah,
I know, like, well, I haven't, like I said, I haven't used my recurve for the last like 2 or 3 months. I've been shooting every other bow instead, and I can't imagine my first shot the recurve would be feel extremely weird. So that's
yeah,
something which we all relate to, I think, when we first touch our bows again. So I think
yeah,
there's got a couple of questions here too.
sure.
So we've got a couple more. Let's see. Now we have a question from. I need to check my other screen. Sorry. It's organized. Here we go. All right. So we had a question from Bit and Kitten. It's also from New York, upstate New York. So the question is, how much do you feel about like talent versus hard work, and how it influences your success in archery?
That's a tough one.
Good question too.
I
Yeah.
think talent will pull you to a level, but hard work is where it separates the men from the boys, basically. It really makes the big difference. But I think talent, there is certain things like talent is, there's a wide range on how you could define talent, you know? Like within archery, I think things that make you talented are a natural low resting heart rate, a natural low blood pressure, a naturally flexible individual as far as joint space go, and certain proportions when it comes to your like upper arm versus your forearm versus upper arm length, things like that. I think can afford you certain benefits that a lot of other people have to work much harder to get or to maintain. So it is, I think in any way, shape, or form, hard work can never be replaced. You know, it really pays dividends off, and ultimately, everybody that is at a high level. Now, I'm talking high level in the world scale. Um, hard work is the defining factor.
Mm.
Skill might separate at the highest level. It might separate you maybe third from 10th place, something like that. You might get a couple places in addition to your hard work. But at the state level, at the national level, I can tell you from experience that I had a lot of skill for whatever reason it was, and I shot really well. But I barely shot 100 arrows, maybe 5 days a week. That's not
Mm.
really a lot of hard work. As a junior, maybe that's a lot of arrows, at least in the United States. In other countries, that's nothing. That is pure amateur hour. But you know, but I did really well. I won nationals and shot really good scores. So some of that is luck, some of that is talent or whatever that may be. But ultimately, hard work can't be replaced. Yeah, definitely not.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. What is the question over here? So go again with each breath. Second question. So how would you suggest ramping up your training routine without injury? So the question is, how do you go up to say 100 hours a day to 200 hours a day without injury? Like what would be your advice to someone who wants to like increase that intensity?
I'd probably go up by 10 to 20% volume every couple weeks. I mean, I wouldn't push it hard. I wouldn't just
Mm,
jump in with both feet, because when you do get injured, well, injuries in archery are not, in general, not catastrophic.
mm,
They are generally overuse injuries, so it's mostly like a tendonitis, tendinosis, bursitis, something along those lines, and those things will put you out for months, because ultimately the only way that you heal from tendonitis is by resting. You
mm,
can't do it. You can't do the same repetitive motion over and over again while you have tendonitis if you want it to go away. So, in my opinion, I think 10 to 20% volume. Like if you're going from 100 arrows to 120, that's 20% volume, but it's not that big of a jump.
mm,
But if you're going from, I can tell you from experience, if I went from 300 and did 20% jump and did 360, that would ruin me. I couldn't do any more than that. So I think it is relative to where you are, and ultimately you just got to monitor what you're doing. From my experience, I would say there's at least a 5 to 7 day delay on how much volume and intensity you are shooting, to where you are going to feel it. About 5 to 7 days later. So that's why I'm saying about every other week, I would try to ramp up a little bit.
mm.
When I would increase bow weight when I went out to the training center, I did a half a turn or like a quarter turn on my limb bolts once a week. So it was a tiny increment of bow weight going up, but
Mm.
I went from shooting 40 pounds to 50 pounds within a year, basically.
Mm.
Um, you know, yeah.
Oh wow. Next question we got from Eliza. Eliza's been watching Korean archery, and they said that meditation was a big part of training. So wondering if that's something that you did as well.
Yes and no. We did meditation in some ways with our sports psychologist, or yeah, I think it was a psychologist. Mostly doing it for the sake of awareness, making sure you are aware of where your thoughts are. So that way, if your thoughts are drifting, you can bring them back to the task at hand, which is what is important. So, like, for example, at a tournament, when it's windy, what is everybody crying about? How windy it is,
Mm.
right? And so generally they're focused on the wind, and instead of focusing on, oh, I need to aim off, or I need to make sure I keep my bow arm even stronger, or whatever it may be, so you can take that distraction of wind, and once you're aware that you are distracted by the wind or something else, you say, oh, great, I'm distracted, I'm going to refocus on what is important. um, Outside of that, as far as meditation goes, I mean, it depends on what you need as an individual. I wouldn't say everybody has to do something like that. I do think that visualization is important, but I don't think, you know, I guess meditation is a very loosely defined thing. So whatever that is for you, and if it brings benefits to you, absolutely do it. But as far as, there are a lot of things that the Koreans do that are not a lot of other countries do, mentally. So it's a totally different animal when it comes to Korea, because that is truly professional level. They have hundreds of people waiting to take one person's spot. Whereas everywhere else, we're hoping we have somebody to fill that slot.
Yes, absolutely true.
So,
And we've
yeah,
definitely heard before that I think the creators said that the national team selection is harder than the Olympic Games.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I
Absolutely.
went there and I shot a FIDA round with them, and I shot like a 1296 out of 1440, which is a pretty good score. 1300 is kind of like a benchmark score, is if you're doing well or not. And I was ranked like 128th. Yeah,
Yeah.
ridiculous. The highest score was like 1365 or something, which is higher than our national like records. Yeah,
Yeah,
crazy, crazy.
it's scary. It's scary how like we have a whole
Yeah,
like system like that supports archery to its professional
yeah,
core. That's a
yeah,
huge goal. I mean, like many of us have said before, like is archery a sport or a hobby? For most of us, it's a hobby. For very few of
yeah,
us, it's a sport where we actually do it as a job and do it professionally. And
yeah.
Korea is one of the very
I
few
mean, for them at
countries.
the top level, they have like Hyundai and Kia, and you name it, whatever company is out there, they have their own professional archery team that represents them. They literally, the executives hire archers to shoot for their company against other companies, and then it's just like a game for them. It's a pastime to watch their archers compete against other companies. And there's hundreds of these companies, and they make a lot of good money. Like a high level Korean archer makes at least 60 to $100,000 a year salary from just their company alone, let alone any other money that they get, which is, it can add up a lot. Yeah.
And then
So it's a whole other level.
that probably explains for those wondering why Korea dominates, archery or has the reputation in archery. That's a pretty big push when you have that financial incentive, that corporate support. People will do it as a full time thing. It's a
Yeah.
lot different than what most of us do. Again, many
And
of
they have a big
us.
payoff too. Coach Lee, I asked him about it, and apparently, what Coach Lee says. So this may not be true anymore, but at one point it was. If you made an Olympic team as a Korean, just making the team, not even medaling, you get the average minimum wage for the rest of your life.
Wow,
That's a huge benefit. So you'll
wow.
shoot a lot of arrows. You'll injure yourself. You'll push yourself to get that, because that is a big payoff. Yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
that's good. Like we're talking a strange language here. Like pops up, we're still like struggling to wake up in the morning and pick our bows up and put
yeah,
together. And these are people who do it for life, and that's amazing.
yeah,
Wow, what an
yeah.
answer. Okay, got a question from Jared from Broad Archery TV, our previous guest. It's a nice question here.
Cool.
So, Jake, what are your thoughts on periodization and your approach to building up and training after an off season?
During off-season periodization for me, so I really worked. As far as I know, I'm the pioneer when it comes to periodization in archery. At least the first one to actually put it out there publicly that I was doing it. And basically, so what periodization is it is a cyclical ramping up and down of volume and intensity. Volume being how many arrows, intensity is what type of shooting you're doing. Are you shooting blank bale, low intensity? Or are you shooting scores, head-to-head match play, high intensity? And you ramp that up and down in a cyclical fashion to essentially produce a peak performance. And a side benefit of that is keeping training fresh and also holding you accountable to your training. Because before you look at the year, you say, okay, I've got 3 months before the next event or something like that, or 6 months or a week, whatever it is. I've got a certain amount of time before the next event. Generally, what I did is I planned my entire year out in one go, and I picked which tournaments I was going to. I ranked which tournaments are most to least important to me and to my individual performance, or that be sponsors, whatever it may be. Obviously, the Olympics is number one, and U.S. nationals. It is important, but it's nowhere near as important as even Olympic trials, which is not nationals. But you can't go to the games if you don't make the team, so trials is important. And so during off season, I would essentially hone in and figure out my maximum amount of arrows that I could shoot. I would build up my strength and stamina. And because I had my training plan laid out, and I would do this ramping up and down essentially in a 4-week cycle. So that'd be week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4 is way less than week 1. And then week 1 of the next cycle is back to that same level. And so it goes up, down, up, down. And every single time you do that, you know how many arrows you're going to shoot that day, the next week, whatever. So even during the heaviest day of the heaviest week, I had a light day the next day. So I still was like, I got 350 arrows to shoot. It's going to suck today, but I got to get this done. Tomorrow, I only shoot 90 arrows. So I get to take the day off, basically. And then I can look at the week and be like, this week's going to suck. But next week, I'm shooting 1,500 arrows this week, but this next week, I'm only shooting 900 arrows. So that means on my light day of the 900 arrow week, I'm only shooting 60 arrows. So I've got a payoff to relax for, and that's time to do some more other things, like maybe work on some equipment or whatever else, and then back to week 1 again, ramp up and down. So I find it to be massively advantageous for performance because you can peak at an event, but also it's an advantage because during training in the off season, you hold yourself accountable to your training itself. And you also, you have a light at the end of the tunnel per se to look at when when you're really having a heavy day of shooting or scoring or whatever it may be. So I worked with actually my wife, we'll plug this, to write this book, Training for Archery. And that's what, there's periodization exactly broken down how to do it for you, how to figure out your maximum amount of arrows, how to build an entire training plan based on, this is your 3-week routine, to a 5-week routine, a 4-week routine. And then depending on how many weeks are in between events, or, if you have 7 weeks or whatever till the next event, you do a 3-week cycle and a 4-week cycle. And you essentially can produce a peak at an event. So my wife, Heather, helped me assemble this book because I had a lot of information in my head on how to do it because I worked with sports performance at the training center to do it. But I couldn't make it user friendly. So she really helped me with that to make it, work for everybody and able to understand. So
I think that segues quite nicely. Another question that we have from Lawrence Mack. So do you do anything special or anything specific before attending a competition or a tournament?
Yes, every single arrow is shot with purpose before a tournament. My bow case is specifically packed for that exact event or events that I am going to, because sometimes they're strung back to back. So whatever's in my bow case that is needed for wet weather, cold weather, rainy weather, hot weather, whatever is in that case or in my luggage beforehand. So yes, absolutely everything is methodical. Everything is nitpicked. There is no detail, no stone left unturned because, like we were talking earlier, what separates the top from third or third from 10th is this. It's the tiniest little fraction of a dust particle that you've missed somewhere. So you really, really have to be on top of everything. That goes for your training, your tuning, your mental work, your diet, your equipment as far as like your condition of your equipment, everything. I mean, like for an example, before every major tournament, I would take every knock off of my arrow and put brand new knocks on my arrows. And the reason why is because as you shoot knocks, like say if you have one knock that is brand new and one knock that is a month old, that knock that is a month old does not clip on the string with the same amount of force, or more importantly, come off the string with the same amount of force that brand new knock does. So your groups change, especially when, you shoot a dozen arrows, you break them over the several months that you've been practicing with, right? So how do you know which knock is new, which knock is old? You don't. So you change them all before a really important event to make sure that every single arrow performs the same. And that's just knocks, that's a tiny little thing.
I've heard that before as well. That's one of the things which is overlooked. Like a knock is like a few cents. Yet,
Yes.
people sometimes don't replace a lot of the hassle of buying a new pack of knocks and that sort of thing. But when you're looking at this level of competition, this level of performance, you have to
Yep.
maintain that standard.
Yep.
So
And
that
I would have, a dozen competition arrows and some practice arrows. So I
mm,
wouldn't intermingle the two, but even still, I would change my competition knocks before every major event that I was going to and just take those knocks and put them in the bag for the practice arrows. Not a big deal. It's not like I'm throwing them out or wasting them. They're still getting used or broke or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess the reality check here, I imagine is like you could lose like a place or a medal because you didn't spend a few cents on an extra knock. That's
Yeah. And I mean, fortunately, I was afforded an unlimited supply if I wanted them. I would order knocks by the bag of 100. So, you know, so I was lucky in that aspect, but I can tell you that pretty much every top compound shooter does it.
mm,
And I was the only recurve shooter to do it to my knowledge. Brady, once Brady asked, he started doing it too, but, it's just one of those little things that when it means the most, you do everything. You don't leave anything unturned. Yeah.
Now, we've got a question from Ellen over here, and I want to paraphrase the question. How much does equipment make a difference in performance? Like, does having better equipment make you a better archer?
It depends. I mean, your budget stuff, yeah, you could probably gain a little bit of a benefit for spending $200 on a set of limbs instead of $85 on the cheapest stuff. It may not be that anymore, but it used to be like the cheapest set of Samick something or others or the KAP limbs were like
Mm,
$85 to $90, at least in the States. So, once you spend about $200 on a set of limbs, you can start to gain some performance. Or you buy a high quality riser, you're going to have durability for a long period of time. As far as anything else goes, arrows, you can see a bit of performance with arrows, especially, in my opinion, when you go from something like a carbon one, which I know isn't a mid-level arrow, that's more of an upper-level arrow. But even going from a carbon one to an X10 with tungsten points, that's a huge jump in money, but you do gain a lot of performance, especially if you're in a windy environment, especially if you're shooting long distances. You do get a lot of benefits of that. Now they're starting to get other arrows that have performance benefits similar to the X10 as far as why the X10 shoots so well,
mm,
especially for finger shooters. Like the Maxima Recurve RZs from Carbon Express. They're a bit bigger arrows, so you're not shooting 70 meters with them, but they shoot really well if you're shooting field archery,
mm.
indoors, 50 meters and in, basically. Um, you know, it depends. My opinion is always you can always gain more benefit from spending money on coaching rather than
Mm.
spending money on equipment. Because oftentimes you can gain more from your form, your mental work, your diet, your strength training, whatever that may be, compared to equipment. You can't really buy points, especially once you get to a certain level of equipment.
Oh, that's great. Next
Yeah.
question. Let's see. We've got one from Rogue again, from Jared. So do you have any tips for keeping up good nutrition at events, especially when traveling? Because sometimes good food isn't necessarily available or easily available. So any tips on that part?
Yes, you bring your own food, or at least something that you can eat that is okay.
Mm,
Like I go to China, and for example, we went to Shanghai one year, and the hotel has food for everybody. You go downstairs and you see, the little thing in English, the tag that says fried pork, and it looked like sweet and sour, like fried pork that you would get at an Asian restaurant here, and it looked really delicious. And I loaded my plate up with it, and then I took one bite and I just turned green because it was deep fried pork fat. There was nothing in there. It was fat.
oh,
So, you're dealing with less than ideal nutrition because, you can't trust the water there. So every piece of vegetable is floating in water. So that's a no. The protein is pretty limited to like basically deli meats that you find on the cold plates, because the other stuff, like I said, deep fried pork fat, that's not exactly protein. So what I would do is I would pack at least one extra large jar of peanut butter with me, a couple reams of crackers, even though I generally didn't want to eat carbohydrates or at least a high level of them. I wanted more lean proteins. And then I would grab like a bunch of packs of tuna fish. and because you can travel with it easy, and it's already pre-drained, and it's not in a can. You don't need a can opener. It's not exactly the most delicious thing in the world, but you gotta pack what you need. You bring one less pair of jeans and you bring extra food. And yes, in some ways it was not exactly strictly legal, because a lot of countries you're not allowed to transport food back and forth. But I wouldn't declare it, because I need my food. I need my nutrition. If I can't perform because of my nutrition, that's like the worst thing possible to lose an event for. So I would pack a whole lot of food. I'd put some in my bow case and some in my suitcase and some in my carry-on. But you cannot travel with it opened, because I will tell you that drug dogs or food dogs or whatever will sniff out the food, and then you're busted. But if you leave it factory sealed, they won't smell it, so they won't take it. So that's my advice.
Wow, that was very specific. I had no idea. That's a really good answer. Thanks, Jake. That was
Yeah.
very, very specific. Wow. Quick question from, well, a question mark here in chat. Are you going to Total Archery Challenge this year?
I don't even I don't
Yeah.
know what Total Archery Challenge is.
I was asking me or Jake, 'cause I'm not going anywhere, but I'm sure like what the Total Archery. I've heard of it, I guess, but I don't really follow it. So help
Is
us
that
out
the
here,
one in
right?
Canada up in indoors, I think? Something like that? I don't
Yeah,
even know.
help us. We'll ask you the question now. Next question. Speaking of the competitions, outside the Olympic Games, are there any favorite events or venues that you've been to?
Favorite event, field archery, by far. Every single time I shoot field archery, I enjoy it. I don't care where I am, in hot, flat plains of Texas or in the French Alps in Val d'Isère, France. I mean, a beautiful place. But anywhere I go shooting field archery, I love it and enjoy it. That's my favorite by far. Yeah.
Beautiful. And a quick comment from K Armstrong: peanut butter smuggler. Sounds about right.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. Next question we have from James. Is there any mental difference between shooting Olympic and barebow? I know you've been doing barebow recently, so are there any mental differences between shooting Olympic and barebow?
Um, as far as mental differences, not 100% directly. I wouldn't say 100% yes. I also wouldn't say no. Um, I think that there is some difference, because you obviously don't have a clicker, but you're just focusing on something else to do, and that's just continually moving and continually adding pressure. You're not waiting for a click to shoot, so you have to drive that yourself. I haven't yet shot enough to find my cue. I'm not looking for a finger drag on the grip type of click to get me to click, or something on this side. I want to control when that happens. But in a sense, I wouldn't say it is necessarily different. The only major change is the string crawling. Really, you've got to pay, in my opinion, a lot more attention on where you're putting your fingers on the string, obviously vertically if you're crawling, compared to shooting Olympic style recurve, because that's all the same thing every single time. And I never visually looked at my hand on the string. It was all done by feel, because I had shot so many arrows.
Amazing. Question from Lemon. This is something you touched on just before. What draw weight to use by professional archers, and are there any limits in high level competition?
There is a limit, 60 pounds, compound or recurve. Nobody shoots that much with a recurve, because nobody's that crazy. At least, well, one person did, but I don't think they still do. And I shot anywhere between, during the most part of my career, anywhere between 48 and 52 pounds. That's somewhat average for men. Somewhere in that 48-pound range for men. Women are in the 42-ish range on average at the highest level. But now that everybody basically is stuck to 70 meters, at least on the world scale, I shot 46 pounds once that started happening, because I didn't see a huge benefit to those extra few pounds.
Yep.
Performance-wise, but I saw a big benefit in my body-wise of physical condition, as far as how much punishment was involved in my system.
And that might be a big factor why the standard distance moved from 90 to 70 meters, having a bit more accessible for most archers that are less than elite level.
That's part of it. The other thing was you had to have 90 meters of shooting plus 20 meters of weight plus 20 meters of a canopies. So you couldn't shoot it on a regular football field, a soccer field, whatever.
Oh,
You
yeah,
had to find a
absolutely.
special field to fit it in. Yeah.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Wow, that's quite a few questions. Of course, any more questions, throw them in chat. We'll see what we can do. I want to segue probably to our final segment for this session here. It's been nearly an hour so far. It's been really good. But I want to
Yeah.
just to talk about we were planning to talk about coaching and your work on YouTube. I think we'll probably just merge them together at the moment because
Great.
that's probably the trendy thing right now. Is I know you started your YouTube channel like years ago with a couple of tuning videos and a few
Yeah.
things and went off the radar for a few years, and suddenly you're back in the business, and you're probably one of the most the largest channels just gaining momentum in the archery field now, because of your experience, your background, and of course now it's basically your job in doing online coaching. So tell us about your YouTube channel. Like, how are you approaching it now, and what's in the works?
Yeah, it's a totally different thing. I actually had a YouTube channel since 2006 and uploaded my first content somewhere in there when I first moved out to the Olympic Training Center when nobody was on YouTube. And, then I basically did everything on Facebook, and I threw up my recordings from Facebook Live into the actual YouTube platform just because people were asking for it. And then basically got started back into it because I wanted people to know that I was putting out seminars and traveling around with my wife doing seminars and stuff. And some people didn't know about it. Some people didn't know that the information was good. Or knew, meaning like some people didn't know that I knew what I was talking about or could teach it. So it's a whole other level. If you know what you're talking about, but you can't teach it, that doesn't help anybody. So I started the channel to just kind of like do something to get information out there, and it exploded and turned into what it is now and where it's headed. So basically, what's coming out now is just continually pushing out content, trying to really give people more information that they don't necessarily have access to elsewhere. Some stuff is repeated elsewhere on the internet, but it's in a different fashion, or even like Coach Lee's book and Coach Lee's information that he puts out is great. But coming from an archer that has actually learned it from the ground up is really valuable, especially when I can tell you what I feel and what matters to me and what really makes the shot happen. It makes a big difference to people at home. And outside of that, I would like to do more equipment-based content as far as testing, performance, actually give real data that just doesn't exist out there. So what are the actual arrow straightness specs? What are the weight specs? What are the tolerances, and how do they compare? Things like that. That's kind of where I'm headed. I would like to do some testing and give information on the actual equipment, but then a lot of feel, like an unboxing, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like, whatever it may be. And then on top of that, it's, now everybody's basically locked down. Nobody's flying anywhere anytime soon. So seminars aren't going to be happening for a while. So that's where I've been doing this online coaching, whether it be like we're doing, you and I right now, talking back and forth. You could be shooting. You could be asking me about form, training, nutrition, whatever it is, whatever you need. Or I've done a lot of actually video coaching reviews where people send me, them shooting, and then I sit down and I have, I'd screen record kind of like you are now, and have them shooting and me talking, and then I can bring my videos of me shooting and frame by frame their arrows and say, this is what's happening. Look at my cursor. You're missing this or that or whatever. And then submit them a video response. And that's been going pretty well. People have been enjoying that. And then locally, I do some coaching as well when we can, as far as, hands-on stuff, whether it be tuning or whatnot, So lots of new stuff, lots of different things going on that I'm glad I came back, because I essentially have a doctorate in archery, right? and I threw that all away by just, cold turkey walking away. And, I actually get to use my degree and help people out. And, put food on the table, because it really, really is important these days to make sure that,
Mm.
you can still afford to live, with being locked up and everything. It's challenging.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic, of course, having your channel up and running again, and especially your recent content. Look, I know for my part, like when I started YouTube, like I came to the scene, it was a much different scene back in 2010, 2011. Not much
Hmm.
out there in terms of information. A lot of casual videos, a lot of hunting
No.
videos, and I thought, well, there's a space in the market there for someone to, share knowledge and share information, and I've reached my limit to some case. I'm not an elite athlete. I don't do that much coaching. So a lot of people
Mm.
ask me these really hard questions like, how do you tune this or how do you pick the right arrows? I'm like, I don't know. If it's straight and it fits on your bow, then it feels good in your
Yeah,
hand,
yeah,
then that's as far as I can do, and I can't really do much more than that. So having someone with
yeah.
a much higher level of experience like yourself, it's been absolutely amazing watching your content, and especially now I've had some chances to work with Coach Lee, for example,
Hmm.
just to seeing things lined up. Actually, one of the funniest things I'll tell you this later, but I'll say it right now. Like I've been a little quiet the last few weeks because in isolation I'm thinking, gee, what video would I make right now? And I look on the YouTube and you've just made it, and I went, oh. Like literally, like yesterday, I was gonna script a video about what goes through an archer's head before the release, and I
Yeah.
see this big thing. I was going, oh, what?
I've seen that a few times. I actually did a video like 2 days after you did one. I didn't even realize you did, and it was, well, at least we have a different perspective on it, and it's
Absolutely, it's been
great.
funny. I
Whatever.
think we had this running joke where like we were covering the KSL shot cycle. You started from the beginning, I started at the very end, started kind
Yeah.
of merge in the middle somewhere. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that was quite an interesting challenge, and it's great to have different ways of presenting it, the different experience levels, and it just been the most fun thing I've had in watching your channel, just looking at what you cover at the moment. So it's been looking amazing to see where it's going. Now, the last thing
Yeah.
we'll plug, of course, by the way, all this online coaching services, which Jake just mentioned, I believe it's available on your website. Is that correct?
Yep. It's jakekaminski.com. Pretty
Easy to
simple.
remember right there. Easy to remember.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I guess there was a perfect thing now as a segue to your recent book. So tell us about the book.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm sore. I worked out the other day, and I hadn't worked out in several weeks, and I am dying. Yeah, new book. That basically doing the channel and making a tuning series, really explaining people how to top to bottom, how I would take my bow out of a box. Speaking of that, here's a sneak peek as to what's coming up. Exclusive first look. I got a new toy to play with that just came in, so um, that'll be coming out soon when I do another shooting video. But anyway, there's a lot of information out there on how to tune your bow. Some of it is very, very old. Some of
Mm.
it is really new. Some of it is from people who have done well, and some of it is from people who really haven't done very well at all. So, I wanted to really give my opinion on how to properly set up a recurve Olympic style bow, how I would take it out of that box and go to the Olympic Games with it. How I prepare my equipment from top to bottom, the methodology, the reason why behind it, and explaining it in a really easy to follow format with, whether it be how to set your stabilizers up and how angles change the balance of the bow, or like a tip of, I use a scope with a level when I'm setting my stabilizers up, because I want to magnify my movement. And if I can get my bow to hold perfectly still with a scope, when I take it off, that bow never moves. So it's against the rules to compete with it, but why wouldn't you put it on your bow to give you the advantage? Um, you know, I'm lucky I had one here because I shot compound for a period of time. But you might be able to borrow one to be able to set your stuff up. So, I wanted to give my take on that, and because of the series, I had basically my thoughts already in a linear fashion that I put down, and I had an app that was similar to this information, but this is completely revamped and way more in depth than the Aptitune app that I had produced a while ago. And it's just a super good resource. No fluff. It's relatively short, but the amount of information, it is just a jam-packed book full of everything that I do, from taking my bow out of the box, aligning the limbs, doing the rough center shot rough bear shaft tuning to walk back tuning, final tuning, fine tuning, you name it, and then building arrows, lots and lots and lots of stuff. So I wanted to get information out there for people to have access to, and really kind of cut through some of, like you said, there's just really not a lot of great resources that have everything listed. You might grab a blurb here and a blurb here and a blurb there, but then they kind of side talk each other, and it's confusing on what do you do first, what do you do second, or what's actually important. Does center shot visually, is that real, or is walk back tuning real, or what's better or worse? So I really, like I said, try to break it down in a way, an easy to follow format that I can use and I can follow, you can use and you can follow, and somebody who is brand new can pull this book up and have their bow set up as good as they can with whatever piece of equipment they have. So that's available on my website as well, along with the coaching and everything else. But we're still, we had so many books sell, and we had a disaster with PayPal that basically refunded everybody's money that they sent to us. And we had to basically send bills to everybody, and it was a mayhem. And my wife genuinely thanks everybody for their patience, because it's been a giant headache. Needless to say, we will not be using PayPal anymore.
Oh, no.
And there was a big something got missed, and it was a cluster. Anyway,
wow.
it was a headache.
Well, great. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to getting my copy. That's something which when I eventually get back to the range, I'll definitely be trying out, because people ask me how
do you have the training book yet?
I have that book, yes. I bought that quite a while ago. Haven't read it, no.
Okay, good. Well, then I won't send you another one.
No, I do have that copy. That's one of the first books I bought, but I will definitely be happy to see the tuning one. Like I said, people ask, how do you tune a bow? I don't know. It shoots, and that's all I can. It doesn't. I don't know. So I also having a very detailed but very comprehensive and accessible guide is something we all need right now for many of us, and certain people want to know. It's it's not as technical as people think it is, but also not as relaxed as people think it is. So it's a nice fine line to tread.
Yeah, and there's the beauty of it is, if you're going to be shooting, you have time to tune your equipment, because tuning the majority of tuning your equipment is done while you're actually shooting. So I tinkered and played with and adjusted and shifted stuff all over the place all the time while I was shooting, because I might as well see what makes the bow shoot better while I'm shooting hundreds of arrows a day, So that's where, so not only did I have the shooting experience, but living at the training center, we had the engineers of the X10, the engineers of the Hoyt equipment, the plungers, the stabilizers, the vanes, you name it. Those people who engineered and designed those things were there at the training center, a couple times a year, basically. And as soon as they got there, I ran over to them and would just couldn't stop asking them questions. Why this? Why that? How this? How that? Help me use your equipment that you designed exactly how you designed it so it shoots better. And then they would tell me why and how and everything. And it's that makes perfect sense. Nobody else does it that way. I'm not going to tell anybody because I'm competing with them. But, I saw an advantage to picking their brains. And then eventually I started to be able to design my own stuff with those companies and have influence in the equipment. So anyway, like I said, I just tried to grab all that information that I had floating around up here. And instead of it just going off into space and never to be seen again, I put it in a format that people can actually use, because people don't have that kind of access to those engineers in general. I mean, you can, but you've got to really go out of your way. And oftentimes it's at a trade show and they're tired because they've had 500 other people ask them those same questions, so sometimes they don't give you as much information or with the same amount of passion as it does with somebody that's, doing it full time, basically.
Beautiful. Okay, so thanks a lot for that. And of course, like we said before, the book's available on the website. And I've seen some people share their photos of their copies, and we're definitely looking forward to
Awesome.
getting shipped out
Yeah.
very shortly. So thanks a lot. I guess we'll start wrapping it up. It's been a pretty long stream at the moment. It's been a fantastic question and
Yeah.
answer. Thanks for people in chat for contributing questions. There's so much to talk about in so little time. So of course this, if people really want to see more of this, we can probably work more on collaborations and more Q&As in the future. But there's just so much to ask, and I think moving forward, there's definitely more to look forward to in your channel as well. So, I guess
Yeah.
we'll wrap it up there. I hope that makes you excited to, if you're not already going back to trading in archery, then makes you excited to get back to it as soon as possible. I'm definitely very excited after all that. So, thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts, experience, and knowledge, Jake. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and anytime, reach
Abs-
out if you got openings, whatever. Just give me some notice, and I'm happy to jump in for anything, anytime.
And
I
of course,
appreciate it.
for everybody else, definitely check out, if you haven't already, Jake's social media channel. So, social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as his YouTube channel, which is Archery God 2006
Yeah.
username.
Throwback 2006. Yeah.
All right, stay safe where you are, people, especially in these current conditions. Hopefully, you're okay, and hopefully, we'll come out this better people. Thanks a lot, Jake, once more, and thanks everyone for joining in. And hopefully, we'll see you all again very soon in the range. We'll see you all next time.